This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
One. Okay, good morning, Rabbi Glatstein. Bruchim Abom to the Kollel Agar de Pirka here in Kew Garden Hills, New York, in Kahal Nachlas Yitzchak. Parshas Vayeishev. See, everybody thought we were going to learn about Chanukah. No, we have to be unpredictable. We're going to actually learn about Parshas Vayeishev. We're going to learn about something. It would seem in the beginning maybe it's technical, but we're going to bring out fundamental understanding of the correct approach to learning Chumash in general. Parshas Vayeishev. Eila Toldois Yaakov. These are the Toldois of Yaakov. We are not going to translate the word Toldois as of yet. Yosef ben Sheva Esrei Shana. Yosef was 17 years old. He was shepherding with his brothers in the sheep. V'hunar. He was a young man, es b'nei Vilha, v'es b'nei Zilpah, together with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, Neshei Aviv, his father's wives, v'yaveh Yosef estiba samra'a el avihem. So, what does it mean, Eila Toldois Yaakov? We are used to translating the word Toldois as children. These are the children of Yaakov. And certainly the pasuk doesn't say anything that's inaccurate. Yosef was certainly the Toilad of Yaakov Avinu, but the problem is he's not the only one. And the question then is, why would the pasuk say these are the children of Yaakov and only list one of the 12 Shvatim? It should say Eila Toldois Yaakov, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zevulun, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Yosef, Ubinyamin, and then we could move on. Why use the word Eila Toldois Yaakov and then only speak about Yosef? Comes Rashi, Reb Shlomo Yitzchaki, as he is known, says Rashi, Ve'ela shel Toldois Yaakov. It doesn't mean these are the children of Yaakov. Ve'ela, and these shel Toldois Yaakov, of the events of Yaakov. Rashi is translating the word Toldois not as children, but rather events. Ela Yishuvehem, these are where they settled, Vilgilgulehem, and the various chain of events, Ad Shaba'u L'Klal Yishuv, until they came to their final settlement. Meaning, the word Toldois, Rashi is saying, does not mean children, but rather means events and history. This is the history of Yaakov. Where does the history of Yaakov begin? Siba Rishona, cause one, Yosef. And through Yosef, everything evolved and everything came about as a result. Says Rashi, what I'm trying to explain to you is the following. Zehu achar yishuv pshutoi shel mikra. The following explains the simple interpretation of the psukim. Lios davar dabur al afnav. For each matter to be spoken in its proper context. Meaning Rashi is saying, even though maybe the word Toldois is not typically translated as children, but in order to fulfill the dictum of Pshutoi Shel Mikra, I'm going to translate the word Toldois as history. Then Rashi says, Umedrash Haggadah. The Medrash Haggadah is no, in fact, the main progeny of Yaakov Avinu is Yosef because they shared many similarities. Yaakov only worked for Rachel to produce Yosef. They looked similar. They shared a common destiny. They were both hated. And therefore, yes, the main progeny of Yaakov Avinu was in fact Yosef. So Rashi gives two pshatim. One he calls Pshutoi Shel Mikra, and one he calls Medrash Haggadah. The Pshutoi Shel Mikra, Rashi says, Toldois means history. Well, Marva Rabbi Glatstein, not sure if all of us have had the opportunity to study in depth the comments of the Rashbam on Chumash. The Rashbam was the grandson of Yaakov. Rashi had only daughters. He had a daughter, Yocheved, and a son-in-law, Meir. And Yocheved and Meir had most of the Balei HaTosfos. So Rabbeinu Tam was one brother. The Rashbam was another brother. And the Rashbam is the grandson of Rashi. The Rashbam knew Rashi. The Rashbam learned with Rashi. And as we're going to see, the Rashbam argued with Rashi. Not just in writing, but personally. And the Rashbam had a different approach to Chumash than his grandfather. So let's learn what the Rashbam's approach is. Let's learn this machlokes, and this will give us a very important foundation how to approach the study of Chumash. Comes the Rashbam. Yaskilu v'yavinu. Comprehend and understand. Oy have seichel. Those who love intelligence. Okay? So any people out there who are superficial and don't like to think, so you could come back next week. But anybody who appreciates the intellect and the analysis, please understand the following. Ma shalamdunu rabbeinu, that which our rabbis teach us, ein mikra yoytze midei pshutai. The pasuk will never be removed from its simple interpretation. By the way, where do our rabbis teach us this principle? It's a Gemara in Shabbos. I'll give you a little background. Take a look at number 4. The Gemara says in Shabbos, Daf Samach Gimel, Amar le Abaye l'Rav Dimi, v'Amri la l'Rav Avia. Abaye said to Rav Dimi, some say to Rav Avia, and some say Rav Yosef said to Rav Dimi, and some say he said it to Rav Avia, and some say Abaye said to Rav Yosef. What's Pshat and Shitas Rebbe Eliezer? Now, what does Rebbe Eliezer hold? Rebbe Eliezer holds that you're allowed to walk on Shabbos with a sword. Now, we're not talking about where there's an Eruv. In Kew Garden Hills, there's a good Eruv. Rav Moshe said the Eruv is good. But let's say in a community that doesn't have a good Eruv. Let's say you're living in Flatbush. Rav Moshe said Flatbush does not have a halachically acceptable Eruv. Rav Moshe said it's Rishus Harabim Doiraisa. So let's say you're walking in Flatbush. That's where I grew up. In deference to Rav Moshe, the Poskim do not accept the Eruv in Flatbush. So you walk. So normally, if somebody would be carrying on Shabbos, he's Mechalo Shabbos b'far Hesya. However, let's say I'm walking with a sword. Walking with a sword. Is carrying a sword considered carrying? So the Shita of Rebbe Eliezer is no. Carrying a sword is not carrying. Why? Because the pasuk says, Chagor charbecha al yarech gibar. Gird your sword on your thigh, mighty warrior. Haidcha, it's your majesty. V'hadarecha, it's your splendor. Meaning a sword is not a masa, is not a burden. It's a sign of majesty. It's like a tie. When you wear a tie, it's not carrying, it's a sign of majesty. It's an ornament. A sword is an ornament. You go to England, right? So you have soldiers and they're carrying a sword. Now, do you really think, Chas v'Shalom, there was a terrorist attack, they would whip out the sword and start fencing with the prospective terrorists? I hope not, right? I hope they have better ways to deal with counter-terrorism than a sword. A sword is an ornament that's a sign of glory. Some of the swords, they're so bejeweled that they would probably break if you even use them. So a sword is a sign of glory, as the pasuk says, Chagar charbechal yarech gibar hoit chavar derecha. Rav Kahana lamar breid Rav Huna. What are you talking about? The pasuk is not talking about a warrior carrying a sword. It's talking about girding yourself with the armaments of Torah. It's talking to a Talmud Chacham, and he should be equipped with the Kashas and the Melchamta Shel Torah. Hai b'divrei Torah ksiv. So how could you say Pshan Rebbe Eliezer is that a sword is an ornament from the pasuk Chabar Chabar Chal Yarach Gibar Hoit Chavad Orecha? That pasuk is not talking about a sword literally. It's talking about Divrei Torah. Says the Gemara Amar Le in Yirai. Amar Le Ein Mikra Yoitze Midei Pshuta. You're right. That's not what it's really referring to. It's really referring to Torah. It's really referring to a Talmud Chacham. But you cannot negate the simple translation of the pasuk that the ein mikra yoytze midei pshutai. Amar Rav Kahana kad havina bar tam nisri shnin. I'm already learning 18 years, and not only that, shas. I'm a baki in shas. I learned the whole shas, and nobody ever told me ein mikra yoytze midei pshutai. It's a good thing I came to yeshiva today. I learned something new. I never knew ein mikra yoytze midei pshutai. V'lo hava yadana dein mikra yoytze midei pshutai. So comes the Rashbam, and the Rashbam says, what I'm going to tell you and what I'm going to share with you will not appeal to everybody. You know who would appeal to? People with a brain. Now, some people, they like a nice vart, a nice gematria, a nice remez, a nice drush. But you start to tell them pshat, they tune out. Why? What are they missing? They're just missing one thing. Seichel. That's all. Common sense which is not so common. Pshat, people don't like pshat, because pshat, guess what you need? You need a moyach. And a moyach is not something that we're all privy to. I mean, over here, obviously, yeah. But out there, not everybody has seichel. What we're going to learn today will only appeal to Balei HaSeichel. Says the Rashbam, why? Because pshat is something that has to be oila al hadas. It has to be rational, reasonable, intellectual. Now, listen to the following. Pshat is not the Yikar HaTorah. Pshat is not Ikar HaTorah. Ikar HaTorah is drush. Now, when I say drush, I don't mean when the rabbi gets up Shabbos morning before laning or after laning and he says a drasha. When I say drush, I mean Gemara. Why do I call Gemara drush? Yod Gimel Midah Shatar Nidrashas Bahem. The 32 principles of Rabbi Eliezer ben Rabbi Yossi HaGalili. That's drush. That's the Ikar Torah. When we say, does somebody learn? Do I learn Torah? Do I not learn Torah? I'm talking about Gemara. That's the barometer. Gemara. Why Gemara? The Kloisenberg Rebbe used to speak to the women in Kloisenberg, and he used to say, tell the women, the women know what their husbands are learning, so he would say, this is what you need. If your husband comes home, and the book that he's learning from is not this big, then he's not learning. You take out a little book, he's learning a Chumash, a Rashi, a Musar, a Halacha. No, tell him he's not learning. The book has to be this big. Now, this is not Lafuke Art Scroll, which is a little bit smaller. That's also good. You could use. The point being is, Rashi says in Shas, learning is Gemara. That's learning. Now, but it's not Pshat. So now what we have to learn is, what in the world is Pshat, and what is learning, what is this all about? Says the Rashbam, Ki af ki ikara shel Torah basalam deinu ulohidienu beramizas hapshat v'ha'agadois v'ha'alachos v'ha'dinim. The ikar of Torah is coming to teach you allusions and agada and halacha through in a more lengthy terminology, through the 32 midos of Rabbi Glatstein ben Rabbi Yossi HaGalili, through the Yud Gimel midos of Rabbi Shmuel, Kavachar Gzer Shava, Klal Prad. So there's two parts of Torah. There's the Pshat, the simple interpretation, which is not the Ikar of Torah. And then there's the Ikar of Torah, which is the Drush. And if you want to know, what did the Rishonim focus on? They did not focus on Pshat. They focused on Drush. Why, says Rashbam? We have to know, why is the Drush the Ikar of Torah? Because halacha could only be derived through Drush and not through Pshat. You can't say, the Torah says, Shein tachas shein, regel tachas regel, ayin tachas ayin, so ein mikor yotzi midei pshutai. No, we don't learn halacha through Pshat. Halacha is only through Yud Gimel Midah Shatar Nidrashas Behem. That's why the Ikar Torah is Drush, because the only way to derive halacha l'maisa is Drush. But the Rishonim, because of their chasidus, because of their saintliness and their piety, nisasku lintais achrei hadrashos. They were inclined to turn after the drush. Shehin Ikar umitoich kach. But the Rishonim who focused on drush and they did not focus on pshat, it came at a cost. And you know what the cost was? The cost was they did not train themselves be'oimek pshutoi shel mikra. They did not train themselves be'oimek pshutoi shel mikra. They did not train themselves in pshat. Why? So says the Rashbam, there are many rationalizations. First of all, the Gemara says in Brachos Chav Chesam Beis, Al tarbu b'neichem b'higayon. Don't teach your children too much grammar or philosophy. Also, it says learning Chumash is not the highest madrega. The highest madrega is Gemara. For whatever reason, la yihorgelu b'pshutan shel mikrais. The Gemara, the Amoraim, the Rishonim did not train themselves in pshat. So you'll say, and what about my Zayda Rashi? He, we're not going to exclude him. He was also, so to speak, he also had a shortcoming in this area. Listen to this. This is one of the most astounding things any other Rishonim ever write. V'gam Rabbeinu Shlomo, even my Zayda Rashi, Avi Imi, the father of my mother, Meir Einei Goyla, who illuminates the eyes of the exile, Shepirish Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim, Nasan Lev Lefarish Pshuto Shamikra. He tried, he made his best attempt, but ultimately, he was unsuccessful, says the Rashbam. V'afani, Shmuel ben Rameir Chasana, even I, his grandson, son of Rameir, son-in-law, Nisvakachti imay, I fought with Zayda. I argued with him. Ulefanov, and I said it to his face, I didn't do it behind his back. And what was Rashi's reaction when his grandson said, Rashi, I don't think you're doing a good job in explaining Pshuta Shemikra? V'haidali! He was Maida. She'ilu hayaloi pnai, if he would have time, hayat sarach lasais pirushim acherim. He would have wrote a different commentary. based on what is innovated to him on a daily basis. Says Rashbam, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. So this is Mamish Mavel al Araya, and it's really astounding. Here the Rashbam is saying that there are two chalakim in Torah. There's Pshat and there's Drush. And the Ikar Torah is Drush. But there's something called Pshat, and the Rishonim, so to speak, failed at their attempt to explain Pshat, and he will not even exclude his own grandfather Rashi, and he argued with Rashi, and he went to Rashi, and he said, Rashi, you need to explain Pshuta Shel Mikra, and Rashi said, you're right, Ziskait, I should have written something better. If I would have had another chance, if I had more time, I would write a Pshat, Pshuta Shel Mikra. So this all requires explanation, elucidation. Certainly the greatest parish ever written, and that will ever be written on the Chumash, is Rashi. What is Rashi? Did Rashi agree to the Rashbam? Did Rashi concede that the Rashbam is right, that he did not do a good job explaining Pshuta Shel Mikra? Let's get a little flavor. Let's learn what Pshuta Shel Mikra means, and let's try to understand what the Rashbam's point is, and try to offer explanation why in fact Rashi's parish stands. Rashi never conceded. Rashi was never moideh. Let's try to explain this. Let's talk about this pasuk. Eila Toldois Yaakov, which Rashi explains it means events, history. Well, says the Rashbam, let me explain something to you. Whoever says that Eila Toldois Yaakov means here's the history of Yaakov, you know what I say about this? Hinezeh Hevel. It's a bunch of nonsense. So whose pshat is he calling nonsense? Rashi's pshat. Because every time it says Toldois in the Torah, or in the Tanakh, or in the Nevi'im, or the Ksuvim, it means one of two things: children or grandchildren. So for example, Eila Toldois Noach. So what does this mean? The end of Vayeishev, it says that Noach was 500 years old, and Noach gave birth to Shem, to Cham, and to Yafes. But Toldois does not mean children. Toldois means grandchildren. So how does it mean grandchildren? So it says that Noach gave birth to Shem, Cham, and Yafes. And then it explains, by the way, the world sinned, and Noach found favor in the eyes of Hashem. So Noach went on to a teva, and then he came out of the teva after 12 months. And after 12 months, he had relations again, and he had children, grandchildren. So Eila Toldois Noach. These are the grandchildren of Noach. So in order to learn about his grandchildren, you need to learn about the teva. It doesn't mean this is the history of Noach, and therefore let me tell you the story about the Mabul. Eila Toldois Noach. Let's get the chain of world history. If you want to know how Noach ended up with grandchildren, you need to learn the story of the flood. Another example. Eila Toldois Esav at the end of Vayishlach. So, Toldois doesn't mean children. Toldois means, Rabbi Say, grandchildren. So Esav had children, and then he had to leave from before Yaakov. So he went to another land, and he went to Seir, and he had more wives, and he had grandchildren. So Eila Toldois Esav means grandchildren. Well, says Rashbam, Eila Toldois Yaakov is no different. These are the grandchildren of Yaakov. Now, the question is, Yaakov had grandchildren. How did he have grandchildren? So the Torah explains. First he had Yosef, and the brothers didn't like him, so they were jealous of him, so they sold him down to Mitzrayim, and then he gets read the Shidduch. First Potiphar wanted him, and then his daughter was given, Osnas was given, and guess what happened? Yosef had Menashe and Ephraim, grandchildren. But then Yaakov's sons went down to get him. And they all went down, and then they meet him at Mitzrayim with how many descendants? 70. So Parshas, Vayeishev, Miketz, Vayigash, and Vayechi is all an explanation of the first pasuk in this week's Parsha. Eila Toldois Yaakov. These are the grandchildren of Yaakov. How did he have grandchildren? Learn the next 4 Parshas. So Toldois, according to the Rashbam, means grandchildren, and therefore anybody who says Toldois means history, Hevel Havolim Omar Kohelas Hakol Havel. It's a bunch of Hevel. It's a bunch of nonsense. It's wrong. Let's learn who the Rashbam was. Let's learn who Rashi was. Let's learn what their approach was to Chumash and in what way it differed. Mar Rabbi say. The Rashbam. Rashbam, if you ever want to know any information about a God of Yisrael, especially the Rishonim, you look in the Shem HaGedolim of the Chidah. This is considered the greatest work of bibliographic proficiency. The Chida writes on the Rashbam, he's the son of the daughter and the student of Rashi. And basically, we don't know anything about the personal history of the Rashbam. In other words, if you want to know where the Rashbam lived, what he did for a living, what his hobbies were, we have no biographical information about the Rashbam. What do we know about the Rashbam? Zero. Someone tell me a story about, there's no art scroll biography, the Rashbam, the life and times of the Rashbam. No, we don't know anything. All we know is two stories about the Rashbam. One, that the Rashbam said, he argued with his Zayda, Rashi, that Rashi should have given a commentary, Yoiser, more al Pipshad, and Rashi conceded. And then there's one more story about the Rashbam. And to me, this is very telling. We know all of the Rishonim were all Kedoshim Utahirim. And certainly when they walked in the public, they did not let their eyes just gaze everywhere. But particularly, we know about the Rashbam, the Chida is now quoting not a story he heard, but what's reported in the Hagois Mordechai and Masechta Eruvin. The Hagois Mordechai and Masechta Eruvin writes, Rashbam lo haya magbiya einov, the Rashbam never lifted up his eyes. Now certainly all the Rishonim were very zahir, not to gaze, but the Rashbam particularly never lifted up his eyes. One time he wanted to go onto a wagon, and it was being led by a horse and a donkey, and he never saw it. He never saw it. He didn't see the horse and the donkey, and his brother, Rabbeinu Tam, said, hey bro, look up. Look who's leading the wagon. It's a horse and a donkey. And the Rashbam, okay, he didn't go on. That means we know one story about the entire life of the Rashbam. In other words, if you were to see a book that came out in the bookstores, the life and times of Rashbam, you knew it was a bunch, and in England they say a bunch of rubbish. It's a bunch of nonsense. Somebody who sheker v'chazav lo'haya v'lo'nivra. We don't know any information about the Rashbam. All we know is one story. The only thing we know is he didn't raise his eyes. So to me it's very telling that this is the only piece of information we know about the Rashbam. That he didn't raise his eyes. Let's try to explain what the meaning of this is. Let's try to explain also, what is this conversation between the Rashbam and Rashi? Imagine Rashbam comes into the room and he says, Zayda, 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 I know you're a great tzaddik, and I know you wrote many commentaries, you wrote on Shas, you wrote on Nevi'im, but do me a favor, Zayda, you need to write Pshutoi Shel Mikra. I mean, what? If there's one thing that Rashi did, it was to write Pshutei Shel Mikra. In other words, if you wanted to know, what is the mantra of Rashi? What is the objective of Rashi? Why is Rashi writing a commentary? What's his goal? What's he trying to accomplish? Rashi's main goal in his Perush on Chumash is to write Pshutei Shel Mikra. So what in the world is Rashbam saying? Rashi, you need to write Pshutei Shel Mikra, and Rashi was Moida? Rashi himself articulates a number of times that the whole purpose of his commentary is to write Pshutei Shel Mikra. Rashi in this week's Parsha, look at number 7. Rashi in this week's Parsha, Nelcha Dasaina. Let's go to Daisan, says Rashi. What do you mean, let's go to Daisan? Right? The brothers said when they saw Yosef was coming, it says Vayeishev, right? They saw, Hine Bal HaChalom Mizbah. And they said, Nelcha Dasaina. Rashi interprets, Levakesh Lecha, to seek out, Nichle Dasais, excuses and pretexts, Sheyamisuch Bahem, that he's going to kill them. Meaning the brother says Yosef is just looking for a pretext to kill us. But Rashi says that might be some kind of creative interpretation. U'afi pshutai shemakim. The Pashat Pshat is, it's the name of a place. Ein mikra yortzei midei pshutai. Nelcha, let's go. Dasaina, to Daisan. So Rashi is giving you pshutai shel mikra. So what does the Rashbam want from Rashi's life? Zayda, you really need to write pshutai shel mikra. I mean, did he ever bother reading what Rashi writes? Why he's writing his commentary? And this is something, Rabbi say, that you can never look at number 6. Back to number 6. This is where Rashi really enunciates most clearly what his goal in writing his Perush on Chumash is. And this is something you should memorize. Bereshis, Paragimel, Pasuk Ches. Rashi says on the words Vayishmeu, Yesh Medrashe Agada Rabim. If you look through the Medrash, there are many, 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 many interpretations. Ukfar Sidram Rabbi Seinu, and if you want to know where they are, look in the Medrash Rabbah. Says Rashi, I am not a random collection of Midrashim. Vani loy basi ela lepshuto shel mikra. My only objective, meaning the only reason I'm putting pen on paper, and I'm using up my ink, and I'm selling copies, is for one objective. If the Rashbam would have gone to one of the great Achronim who wrote a sefer of drashos, he say, Rabbi, instead of giving drashos on, before Pesach and before Yom Kippur, you should really write Pshuta Shel Mikra. That would be, an intelligible conversation. But for the Rashbam to go to Rashi, say, Rashi, look at the words he used. He says, the Rashbam number 3, Nisvakachdi imai. I argued with him, I fought with him. V'hoidali. He was minded to me, I need to write Pshuta. But that's Rashi's whole objective. If Rashi wouldn't tell us what his objective is, I could understand why the Rashbam went to Rashi. But Rashi writes so many times, Vani loy basi ela l'pshuto shel mikra. Look at Rashi in Parshas Boy. Hachodesh hazeh lachem. This month's for you, not this bud's for you. This month's for you. Hachodesh hazeh lachem. Says Rashi, the word hazeh implies that Moshe Rabbeinu, that Hashem was pointing to the new moon. Harahu levana b'chidusha. Hashem showed Moshe the month in its renewal. V'amar lo, and he said to him, Kishahayoreach mischadesh yiyah l'cha rosh chodesh. You see? Mayra b'etzba. He pointed with his finger and he said, when the moon renews, then it needs to be Rosh Chodesh. But says Rashi, the pasuk can never be extricated from its simple interpretation. It refers to Chodesh Nisan. HaChodesh hazeh, this month is for you the first month of the year. So Rashi, Keseder, so many times brings up this principle in Mikro Yotzim Dei Pshutai. What was this conversation that took place between Rashbam and Rashi? Rabbi say, let's learn a little bit about Rashi himself. Okay? Good, Rabbi say. Everyone having a good day so far? Everyone in a good mood? Smile. Yeah. Okay. Says the Chida about Rashi. What is Rashi? What does Rashi stand for? Reb Shlomo Yitzchaki. Why is he called Reb Shlomo Yitzchaki? That wasn't his last name. That was a kinoi for his father, Rabbeinu Yitzchak. By the way, when Rashi begins his commentary, Amar Reb Yitzchak, that's not his father. Reb Yitzchak was a Tana, who Rashi is quoting the Medrash from. Okay? Anyway, who were the great Talmidim of Rashi? Rashbam, Rabbeinu Shmaya, I think one of the Talmidim of Yehuda Bar Yakar, and many of the Balei HaTosfos. So now we learn an amazing thing. Let's get how Rashi wrote his commentary on Shas. You think Rashi woke up one morning and he just he wrote Shas, and then they published it. Rashi went through many editions of commentary on Shas. Rashi says the Chida wrote 3 editions on Shas. The edition that we have is edition number 3. So when you learn Rashi on Shas, we learn. So sometimes it says in the Chveis, the middle of Makos, the middle of difference, Rashi passed away over here. Avada Rashi wrote a commentary, but he didn't finish it the 3rd time. Okay? He wrote 3 commentaries on Shas. The one that we have is the 3rd edition. Says the Chida, Rashi was very precise in his terminology. Every word you could be medayek is merames to tilei tilim of halachos. I'll tell you a very important fact. Sometimes, you learn Tosfos, and Tosfos says, perish bekuntris, X, Y, and Z, frak Tosfos akasha. And you look in Rashi, and Rashi doesn't say that. Right? You ever see Tosfos quotes Rashi, and he slugs up Rashi, and Rashi doesn't say what Tosfos says, Rashi says. You know why? Because Tosfos has had the 1st and 2nd edition of Rashi. And often Tosfos is referring not to the edition we have, but to one of the original editions of Rashi. Maybe, I don't know. What I was referring to is Tosfos on Shas. Sometimes he quotes the Kuntras. Those were some of the early editions on Rashi. What about Rashi on Chumash? How many editions of Rashi on Chumash are there? So I found one interesting Taz. The Taz wrote a commentary on Rashi called the Divrei David. It's one, there must be a couple dozen Perushim on Rashi. One of the most excellent ones is the Divrei David, which is the Taz's commentary on Rashi. Take a look in Rashi in Kisavai, Perek Chavav, Pasuk Yud Zayin through Yud Ches. So the Psukim say, Hashem hemarta hayayim and Ata hemircha hayayim. Right, in Parshas Kisava, it says, like we say in the Yom Kippur, Anu mamirecha v'yata mamireinu. Where does that come from? It says, as Hashem hemarta hayayim, Hashem hemircha hayayim. What do the words hemarta and hemircha mean? You ever wonder about that? It's only in the Chumash, it's only in the Torah, so probably it's worthwhile knowing what they mean. Says Rashi, Ein lohem eid moichiach b'mikra. There is no testimony from any other word in the Tanakh what the words he'emarta and he'emircha mean. And therefore Rashi says, it's anybody's guess, so I'll give you mine. And my guess is, V'li nira shehu lashon hafrasha v'havdala. In my opinion, it's a lashon of separation, separating and being mavdil. Hivdalta lecha, I separated to you, me'alehei hanechar, from the foreign gods, meaning you separated God from all the distant gods, all the false gods, and He separated you from all the Amei Haaretz, from all the nations of the world. Meaning, according to Rashi, there is no pasuk in Tanakh where you'll find the word He'emarta and He'emircha, from which we could extrapolate what it means over here. And therefore Rashi takes his best guess. His best guess. Davar acher matzasi lahamed. Or you could say, I found a testimony. Lashon of Yisamru kol payalei aven. He'emarta and He'emircha means glory, majesty. Like Yisamru, all the evildoers, they glory in themselves. So comes the Taz, and the Taz says, you know what this Rashi is? It's a stira minei obey. Because Rashi begins, Ein lohem eid moichiach. There's no testimony what the word hemarta means. And then Rashi says, Matzasi lohem eid. I found the testimony. Says the Taz, you know what the pshat is? The first comments of Rashi is Madura Rishona of Rashi. In Rashi's first edition, he could not find any source, any aid. And then in Madura Shniya, he found an aid, but he did not remove what he wrote in Madura Rishona. That's what the Taz writes on Rashi. So that means...
On the Torah also you have more than one.
Exactly, that's what I'm trying to bring out. From this Taz we see that Rashi on Chumash also wrote more than one edition, and it could be in one Rashi, the two Perushim are, one is Madura Rishona and one is Madura Shniya.
I know that Rashi has two versions. One is the Spanish, one is the French editions of the Rashi.
On Chumash? Okay, I'm not familiar. I don't know. Possibly, I don't know about that. I personally am not aware. So, this is what the Taz is saying, that there are two editions of Rashi. Sometimes Rashi will quote both. Mar Rabbi Sai, fasten your seatbelts. We're going to learn now one of the classic examples of the point of contention between Rashi and the Rashbam. Mar Rabbi Sai, if I were to ask you, Yosef was sold. Who was he sold to? Raise your hand, if you know. Yishmaelim. No, Midyanim. No, both. No, neither. No, he was sold, but he was on sale, so they got him to... What happened to Yosef? So look in the Psukim. These are probably two of the most confusing Psukim in Kol HaTorah Kula. The brother said, look at number 13. L'chu, let's go. V'nimkarenu la Yishmaelim. Let's sell him to the Arabs. V'yadenu al tehibai. Let's not throw our hands against him. Ki achinu v'sarenuhu. He's our brother. He's our flesh. Vayishmu echav. Vayavru anoshim midyanim. And midyanim men pass by. What do midyanim men have to do with anything? They said, let's sell him to Yishmaelim. Soicharim. Vayimshechu. And they pulled him out. Who pulled him out? The midyanim. The brothers. The Yishmaelim. Vayalu tzirus min habar. So 1 second. So they wanted to sell him to Yishmaelim. But then the pasuk Vayimkos Yosef LaYishmaelim. So this is how I would have wrote it. Let's sell him to Yishmaelim. Remove the Midyanim because it's completely random. It's a non sequitur. It's nothing to do with anything. And they sold Yosef to the Yishmaelim for 20 silver pieces. Vayavius Yosef Mitzrayma. But who are these Anoshim Midyanim? What in the world does it mean, Vayavru Anoshim Midyanim? I mean, they wanted to sell him to Yishmaelim. The end of Chavchas, they did sell him to Yishmaelim. So who are these Midyanim? And it's just, by the way, if I were writing the Psukim, this is what I would write. It's a good thing that they didn't give it to me. But L'chu v'nimkar l'Yishmaelim. I would take out the words Vayavru Anoshim Midyanim, because who cares who was passing by, and why didn't it say, and how much was, by the way, how much was tuna fish a pound that day? Imagine the Torah, and in Wasserman, tuna fish was 33 cents a pound, and then it should say, Vayishmu echav vayimshechu. Right? After talking about the brothers, it should say the brothers pulled him out of the bar and they sold him to the Yishmaelim. Comes the Ibn Ezra. And the Ibn Ezra says, stop making such a fuss over here. Don't you know Sefer Shoftim? It says about the Malchei Midyan that they were Yishmaelim. Midyanim are Yishmaelim. So it means like this. Let's sell him to Yishmaelim. The Yishmaelim were passing by. The brothers yanked Yosef out of the pit. They sold him to the Yishmaelim. Don't get fooled by the Yishmaelim, Midyanim, Yishmaelim. Yishmaelim and Midyanim, they're all the same. Azoi Zak, the Ibn Ezra.
Why are you trying to fool me? Why don't you just say Yishmael?
Because the yeshivas are non-for-profit organizations. They don't learn the prophets, right? They don't learn Navi. So it's forcing you to learn Sefer Shoftim and learn that Midyanim are Yishmaelim, and thereby, after you complete your knowledge of Torah, you'll understand what this pasuk means. It's not trying to trick you. It's trying to produce real Tamei Chachamim. What?
What is the difference?
Between Yishmaelim and Midyanim?
What is the difference?
Different types of shmatas. It's a different type of shmata.
What's the difference?
It's basically, there's no difference.
They take him to
What's the difference between a sweet potato and a yam? 17 cents a pound, right? That's the only difference. So too, what's the difference between a Midyani and Yishmaelim?
Are they both the same?
They're the same thing. They all mean the same. Yeah. That's how the Ibn Ezra reads the pasuk.
Another job.
Going to sell them to Ishmael. They left for go get lunch at wherever, and the Midyanim came by because the pasuk says it was the Midyanim that pulled them out.
No, it doesn't say the Midyanim pulled them out. Okay, that's how the Ibn Ezra reads the pasuk. That's how the Ibn Ezra learns it. That Yishmaelim and Midyanim, they're all the same. Midyanim and Yishmaelim, they're all the same ethnicity. Comes Rashi, and Rashi says like this. Rashi says there were a lot of people, a lot of things going on. Yosef was sold many times. Why? The Midyanim are different than the Yishmaelim. Says Rashi, Zuhi Shayara Acharas. This was a different caravan. Yosef was sold many times. Vayimshechu, who pulled Yosef out? The Bnei Yaakov pulled him out. It doesn't say the Bnei Yaakov. If anything, you would say the Midyanim pulled him out. No, the Midyanim put out. Everybody knows Mechiras Yosef. Where does everyone know Mechiras Yosef from? From the Gemara. So therefore, you can't argue on what it says in the Gemara. You have to say the Bnei Yaakov pulled him out. Who did they sell him to? Yishmaelim. The Yishmaelim sold him to Midyanim, and the Midyanim sold him down to Mitzrayim. That's not what the pasuk says. It says they wanted to sell him to Yishmaelim. It says Midyanim passed by. Yeah, but then it says they sold him to Yishmaelim. So you have to say the Midyanim were different. They sold him, the brothers yanked Yosef out of the pit. They sold him to Yishmaelim. And the Yishmaelim sold it. Why does the Torah say the Midyanim were passing by? To teach that the Yishmaelim sold it to the Midyanim. So far we have two Perushim. Ibn Ezra says Yishmaelim and Midyanim, they're all the same. Rashi says they sold them to Yishmaelim, but the Torah says the Midyanim pulled them out, the Midyanim were passing by to explain that the Yishmaelim sold them to the Midyanim.
It doesn't say that. It says that the whole group.
What?
The Ishmaelim had him the last one.
Right. But says Rashi, why does it say the Midyanim were passing by? What's it there for? Must be, well, the Torah is not giving random information. Must be to teach that the Ishmaelim sold it to the Midyanim.
But this is right.
It's not a straight.
What?
I don't care who sold to who, what he ended up in Mitzrayim.
You sold it to 100 people.
Again, this is you need to know the MS. We have to know the truth. We have to know what happened.
You mixed up over here. It's a whole mixed
No.
up over here already.
The Ibn Ezra says no mix up. Ibn Ezra says it's the Arabs' fault. It's all the Arabs' fault. Rashi says Midyanim Ishmaelim. Comes the Rashbam, and the Rashbam says that whatever they taught you your whole life, they tricked you, they fooled you. Your first grade Mora, your second grade Rebbe, they tricked you. They never told you the real story. Everyone is reading the pasuk wrong. Says the Rashbam, they wanted to sell Yosef to the Ishmaelim. Meanwhile, the Torah says, guess who passed by? Minyanim were passing by. It doesn't say the brothers pulled him out of the pit, like Rabbi Yosef said. It says, must be, there's something called a noun and a pronoun. So if the last noun mentioned was Midyanim, Vayimshechu is the Midyanim pulled him out. The Midyanim then sold him to the Ishmaelim. Mar v'Abaisai. So what did the brothers do? Nothing. The brothers were astonished that when they came back to the pit, Yosef wasn't there. The Gemara says, Mechiras Yosef? No! That's the Gemara could say whatever it wants. If you want to give Pshutay Shel Mikra, the brothers have no idea that Yosef was sold. Asara Harugei Malchus? Good for all the Baal Darshanim. Why distort the pasuk? Because of what the Gemara says. Says the Rashbam, Avada and Avada, take a look. Vayavra Anoshim Midyanim. They went down to eat their salami sandwiches. But they didn't want to eat it by the pit, because how would that, it's not nice to eat a sandwich when your brother is suffering in the pit. They saw the Yishmaelim. They said, Lechunim kan Yishmaelim. They saw him from a distance. So they're standing, let's say, 100 feet from the pit. And they see the Yishmaelim from the distance. Meanwhile, before the Yishmaelim came, the Midyanim came. And while the brothers were eating their salami sandwiches, the Midyanim kidnapped Yosef. And they sold him to the Yishmaelim. Says Rashbam, Yishloim Ashachem lo yadu. Yosef said, Asher mechartem oisi, you sold me. He just meant, because of what you did, I was sold. Za nirali. And this is the key to the whole day. Lefi oimek derech pshutay shel mikra. There's something called pshutay shel mikra, and there's oimek pshutay shel mikra, the depth of the pshat. Ki vayavru anoshim midyanim. The simple meaning of the anoshim midyanim passed by, it means it was a coincidence, it was a mikra. They sold him to the Ishmaelim. And even if you want to say the brothers sold him to Ishmaelim, it means they told they said like this. They saw the Ishmaelim. They wanted to sell it to the Ishmaelim. But when the Midyanim yanked him out, the brother said, do us a favor, we wanted it to sell to them, sell it to them. According to the Rashbam, Mechiras Yosef never happened. According to Rashbam, Asar Harugei Malchus, snapshot. According to Rashbam, all the Meshech Chachma that we suffer, all the generations selling Yosef, never. So who sold? The brothers were eating bread. They wanted to sell him to the Ishmaelim. You're right, they wanted to sell him, but they never did. They had absolutely no idea whatever happened to Yosef. There's a very exhaustive commentary on the Rashbam. And in this footnote, in number 17 on the Rashbam, he brings down 4 very compelling reasons why the Rashbam did not learn like Rashi. Number 1, noun, pronoun. Noun, it says Midyanim, and then it says Vayimshechu. If Vayimshechu was going on the brothers, it would say Vayimshechu ache Yosef es Yosef. Number 2, right, because a pasuk would not switch the noun of the pasuk without letting us know. Number 2, if until pasuk Chav Zayin we're talking about Yishmaelim, but pasuk Chav Ches we're talking about Midyanim. And all the commentaries are bothered. Ibn Ezra therefore is forced to say it's all the same. Rashi says back and forth. No, the Rashbam says Vayavra Anoshim Midyanim, they unknowingly passed away. This was passed by. This wasn't the plan. Number 3, Reuven comes back to the pit. And Reuven says, Oivei, where's Yosef? What happened to him? Reuven, it's not rocket science. The brothers took him out of the pit and they sold him. What did Reuven not understand about, Hayelad Einenu, V'ani Ona Ani Ba? What do you mean Hayelad Einenu? What was Reuven missing? The brothers sold him. The answer is nobody knew what happened to Yosef. As far as they knew, Vayeishev did a Houdini act and he vanished. They had no idea ever what happened to, what about Miyad Yishmaelim? So it's good.
That's against Rashi. That's against Rashi. The last one who sold it.
So you're saying in later, Vayeishev hu Masayma Miyad Yishmaelim.
He was sold from the Ishmaelim. He sold.
No, he doesn't. He was brought from the Midyanim.
No, he was bought.
So Rabbi Ben Chavir was asking, later on in the Torah it says they bought Yosef from the Yishmaelim, which is very good according to the Rashbam, but according to Rashi, not. Unless you say Rashi holds, he was Nimkar Pa'amim Harbe, the Minyanim then sold him back to the Yishmaelim. I mean, when somebody's on the market, you ever get something in, somebody gives you a gift, and you know this gift's been through many hands. Especially when you get a gift and it says donated from Mishpachas da-da-da, and they weren't the people who gave it to you. Never happened? I got a wedding present. May somebody who was not invited to my wedding, They weren't smart enough to take off or Shalach Manas, right? Shalach Manas. Simchas Purim from Yankel Pfefferkorn, from, you don't know him from, they forgot to take off the sticker. So, Mar Rabbi Sai, the final compelling raya, number 16. What does Yosef say? What do they say about Yosef? Ki gunoiv gunavti. I was kidnapped. No, he wasn't. He was sold. According to Rashi, Yosef was sold. According to Rashbam, he wasn't sold. He was kidnapped from the pit and then sold. Therefore, the Rashbam learns that but you'll ask, but wait a second. But you look through the pages of Gemara and Medrash, and we know the brothers are always held accountable for Mechiras Yosef. And the Rashbam says, I don't care what it says, because what I'm after is Oimek Pshutai Shel Mikra. And we're going to explain what this means. Number 8, we're going to have to hold it till after. Number 18. I'm going to give you 3 examples of where the Rashbam uses this expression, not pshutoy shel mikra, but oimek pshutoy shel mikra. I say a pasuk every day. My name is Daniel, so at the end of davening I say, Dan, Yadin, Amoy, Ki Achad, Shiftei Yisrael. Begins with a Dalet, ends with a Lamed. What does it mean, Dan should judge his people like one of the tribes of Israel? Rashi, of course, says it's going on Shimshon Hagibar. The Targum Unkla says it's going on Shimshon, that Shimshon will judge his people. Says the Rashbam, that's ludicrous. Anyone who says this pasuk is talking about Shimshon, Loi yada be'oimek pshuto shel mikra klal, doesn't know what oimek pshuto shel mikra is. You think Yaakov is prophesying on one person that will die in the hands of the Plishtim and they're going to poke out his eyes and going to die together with the Plishtim? No, it's going on the entire Shevet Dan who traveled behind the Jewish people, even in times of Yeshua, and because he would follow all the Golim, and he would have to fight off all the nations of the world and be lezanev hanachashalim and to take revenge. So therefore Hashem is saying, Dan yadin amoy, Dan should take the revenge of his people. I have a question for you. But how could he argue on Rashi? Rashi says it's referring to Shimshon. What's the Rashbam's problem with Rashi? The Rashbam's problem with Rashi is, it's not oimek pshutoy shel mikra. I'll give you another example. Vayomer oid Elokim el Moshe zeh shemi la'olam v'zeh zichri l'dar dar. The Rashbam says a pshat, zehu ikar oimek pshutai shel mikra. Let me give you one example. Let me give you one more example. V'hayu la'ois al yadecha. It should be a sign on your hand. So raise your hand if you put tefillin on your hand every day. Nobody puts tefillin on their hand. It means the arm. Well, how does it mean the arm? Al pi drush. We make drushas that it means the arm. What if you go up to Shemaim and you put tefillin on your hand every day? Do you get schar? Not for the mitzvah of tefillin. You did nothing. Actually, you would have been better not doing anything because you made brachas levatala. You'll be much better. Says the Rashbam, forget the drush. It means al yadecha. Why? It means as a reminder. Somebody who wants to remind themselves of something, they they tie a red string around their hand. So too, it should be a sign on your hand. Lefi oimek pshutai. It should be zikaron tamid as if it was written on your hand. Forget, you don't have to make zera shavas and klala prado klaus. Write a sign as if it was on your hand. This is oimek pshutai. Marva Rabbi say, where did the Rashbam get this expression oimek pshutai from? The earlier source of oimek pshutai comes from the Medrash Seichel Tov, written by Rabbi Menachem Rabbi Shloimeh. He has this expression, V'yesh ma'amikim b'loshain hapshat. Or a number, that's what he writes in Vayeishev, in Parak Lamed Beis, Pasuk Lamed Gimel, Parak Lamed Gimel, Pasuk Daled. He writes, Ma'amike loshain hapshat. Apparently then, listen carefully, the difference between Rashi and the Rashbam is, of course Rashi says, Va'ani loy basi ela lepshutay shel mikra. But the Rashbam has a different barometer, what meets the bill of pshutay shel mikra. The Rashbam defines pshutay shel mikra as oimek pshutay shel mikra. What's the difference between pshutay shel mikra and oimek pshutay shel mikra? Hopefully we could explain b'siyata d'shmaya. Let's give two more examples and then we'll try to wrap it up. Says the Rashbam in his Hakdama to Parshas Mishpatim, look at number 23. Yedu v'yavinu yoidei seichel. All those who have intelligence should know. It's very interesting. Whenever the Rashbam introduces his Mahalach in Chumash, he says this is appeals to people with seichel. He says, what I'm going to explain is not halacha. Halacha is the yikar. But what I'm going to explain is pshutai shel mikra lefi derech eretz. Let me give you two more examples, and then I hope to explain it very clearly. The Rashbam says on the pasuk, Ki yad al keis ka milchama lashem ba'amalek. What does it mean, Ki yad al keis ka? So says Rashbam, there are some people who try to explain it. Case refers to the throne of God. When Klal Yisrael has Malchus, Kiyad al Keis Ka, when Klal Yisrael establishes their Malchus, then they'll be able to destroy Amalek. Says Rashbam, that's nonsense. That's not what Kiyad al Keis Ka means, but rather Kiyad al Keis Ka means that Hashem lifts up his arm on his throne and swears that he will destroy Amalek. But don't explain Kiyad al Keis Ka that when Klal Yisrael has Kisei Malchus, then you'll destroy Amalek. It's very odd that the Rashbam would reject the pshat. That you know who says the pshat? The Gemara itself. The Gemara in Masechta Sanhedrin says there are three mitzvahs that Klal Yisrael are commanded when we enter Eretz Yisrael. One is to appoint a melech, one is to destroy Amalek, and one is to build the Beis HaMikdash. And says the Gemara, which one comes first? Ki yad al keis ka milchama, first make a melech, and then destroy Amalek. So the Gemara is saying, Ki yad al keis ka means make a melech and then destroy Amalek. And the Rashbam says, Ein nira klal. Now the Rashbam is a great man, but guess who he can't argue on? He can't argue on the Gemara. So what does Rashbam mean? By the way, the Rashbam says, anyone who says the pasuk Don Yadin Amai refers to Shimshon doesn't know how to learn. Really? Look at number 26. The Gemara in Saita! It refers to Shimshon! Rabbi say, let me explain something to you. There is a critical machlokes between Rashi and the Rashbam. Rashi will not budge, Rashi would never budge, and Rashi was never moided to Rashbam. Marv Rabbi say, you could learn on Shabbos, open up your Parsha sheets and read them, obviously not during Chazar Sashatz or Laning, and you could read 500 Perushim. There are only 4 basic Perushim on the Torah. Oh, Shivim Panim La Torah! And the Chavetz Chaim brings down a Medrash, there's 600,000 Avada, there's 70 Perushim, and every Pshat the Chassam Sofer says is V'yatzav V'nachem V'kayim V'yashar. But there are only 4 fundamental Pshatim in Torah. It's called Pardes. Pshat, Remez, Drush, Side. And when the Gemara says that Shimshon is being referred to in the pasuk Don Yadin Amai, Avada is MS, that it refers to Shimshon, and if you don't believe it, you're not B'Kairas, and if you pick up a bottle of wine, it's Yayin Nesach. If you say, oh, it's a Midrash, but I don't believe, no, you have to believe it. If you don't, you're not B'Kairas. Pashtos. But the Rashbam is just saying one item. It's not pshat. There's something called pshat. And when the Gemara says it's referring to Shimshon, the Gemara means that's the drush, but it's not the pshat. There's only one pshat. And as pshat, it doesn't refer to Shimshon. And Rashi and the Rashbam have a little bit of a nuance of difference. The opinion of Rashi is that if we have certain traditions from Chazal, that certain things occurred, then you cannot interpret the pasuk differently. Now, listen carefully. You're allowed to interpret it differently. And it might be a valid explanation to interpret it differently. But it still won't be pshat. Pshat still has to be consistent on some level with the traditions of Chazal. And the Rashbam says, no, they don't. There's something called oimek hapshat. Oimek hapshat is, you never learned Gemara before, there are no midrashim, all you have is what's inside your skull. And you need to analyze the pasuk, and if you have no information from the outside sources, you need to go, but I don't know where to go! Guess where you go when you don't know where to go? Deeper! Think! Use your brain, use your skull. And if it's not consistent with the Gemara, it doesn't mean it's wrong. There's something called Eimek Hapshat, and there's something called Drush. And even if the Gemara says it refers to Shimshon, Avada refers to Shimshon, the Drush, but it's not the Pshat. And if the Gemara says Kiyad al Kes Ka means when Klal Yisrael have Malchus will destroy Amalek, that's the Drush. It's not the Pshat. So let's come back to Mechiras Yosef. Rashi feels there is no, but Rashi is bothered by it. There's a kasha here. The kasha is, it says Midyanim, and it says Vayimshechu. It must be Vayimshechu is going on the Midyanim. Rashi says, you're right. That's how you would read it if you only took into account the text itself. But Rashi says part of the guidelines of Pshat is you need to take into account the traditions from Har Sinai. And the Rashbam says, no. You just need to dig deeper. Analyze the psukim at face value for what they are. Analyze the psukim, look in the context of the pasuk, look at other clues from other psukim and Tanakh. But to start saying, well, we have a tradition from Har Sinai that the brothers sold Yosef, that's right. That will be the drush, and that will be the remez, and that will be the soid. And that is the ikr! Meaning, when we walk out of the shul today, who sold Yosef? The brothers! The Rashbam said, the Midyanim, that's Pshat. But the Pshat is not the Ikr. Even the Rashbam would agree the main thing is not the Pshat. The main thing is the Gemara. But there is something called Pshat, and you can't negate it, and you can't dismiss it. And you need to be able, when you learn, to learn Bahadraga, learn based on levels, in a coherent manner. And a coherent manner means you go step by step. And the first step is, what is the pasuk saying simply based on the context of the psukim? And the Rashbam would say the pshat of Mechiras Yosef is the brothers never sold him. That might not be the ikar explanation, but it is the most elementary explanation. And Rashi would come and say, Rashbam, now listen to how I'm explaining it. Rashi would say, Avada, that's oimek hapshat. But there's only one pshat. And in my barometer and in my value system, the traditions of Chazal will play a role even in learning Pshat. And therefore, because of our traditions, Pshat in the Pasuk will not be the Midyanim Yanktim. But that's what it says. Says Rashi, you need to expand and bring in the corpus of Torah Shabbat Peh, even in learning Pshutei Shel Mikra. So Rashi's mantra is Vani loy basi elo lepshutei shel mikra, but incorporated in that is many of the traditions of Chazal. The Rashbam says leave the Torah Shabbat Peh, so to speak, out of Pshat. Let me give you one example of what I think Rashi learns. There's a famous tshuva in the Radvaz, and the Radvaz has a kasha. I'll say it very quickly. Why is chametz so chamor? You have to burn it. You have to destroy it, you can't see it, you have to search for it, you have to look in the nook and the crannies, you can't get hana, you have to be mevatel it, you have to burn it. And the Radvaz says, is it because we're used to eating it the whole year, so you have to take extra precautions? No, because chadash also you eat the whole year and you don't have to take these extra precautions. Ultimately, the Radvaz says, I have no idea why chametz is more chamor. It must be because chametz represents the Yetzer Hara, and the Yetzer Hara is our most vicious enemy, and we need to destroy him at all costs. So the Chidah says, listen to what's going on over here. What's going on over here is you have a posek, you have the Radbaz. He's not a parshan, he's not a darshan. He wants to know halachically, why is chametz so chamor? And he could come up with nothing other than a drush in chametz. Says a chida, a very important thing. Sometimes there is no pshat. Sometimes you have to say, well, I'm going to read the simple meaning of the pasuk, and it means an eye for an eye, and therefore we're going to... No, in that case, there's no pshat. The drush is then downgraded or upgraded to the pshat. There are times where the pshat does not meet the bill of the way the Chachamim view it, and therefore in such a circumstance, we will not interpret it literally, and then the drush becomes the pshat. That's what Rashi feels. Rashi says very often, you're right, if you read the simple meaning of the psukim, the brothers didn't sell Yosef. But that's not acceptable for pshat. Pshat needs to incorporate traditions and drush as well. So what did the Rashba mean? I went to my Zayda and I told him he needs to write a perush, more pshat, and Rashi agreed. Let me tell you how the conversation went. The Rashbam never went to Rashi and said, Rashi, I feel my mahalachim pshat is better than your mahalachim pshat. Rashi would say, Yingala, get lost. I'm Rashi. Rashi is the king of all perushim. It will stand forever as the authoritative pshat. What the Rashbam asked Rashi was, Rashi, even if you don't hold that my explanations are pshat, and they don't meet the official pshat, but Shivim Panim LaTorah, one of them is what is called Oimek HaPshat. So even if you don't agree that my Oimek HaPshat should be Pshat, but it's still a legitimate way to learn Torah, and Rashi says, you're right. And if I would have more time, I would also write that. But not as the authoritative Pshat, as a valid way to learn Chumash. The eternal machloikas between Rashbam and Rashi is Rashbam learns that pshat is merely without, you don't know any Gemaras and any Midrashim and any Tarshim al Peh, just use the skull. Lose reason, logic, analysis. Use your brain, and whatever your seichel tells. That's why the Rashbam always says that my attempt at pshat appeals to the Balei HaSeichel. Rashi says, no, I don't agree with your measuring. So let me give you a few, two quick examples, and then we'll tie it all together. Mar Rabbi say. I said that last time. This time for real. Until next time. Okay, so let me give you an example. Vatelech lidroishas Hashem. They went to seek out Hashem. Who's that talking about? Look, this is number 34. They went to seek out Hashem. Rivka. Where did she go? The Beis Medrash of Shem. Mehechi Teisi, Beis Medrash of Shem. Maybe she went to Brisk. Maybe she went to Panovich. Who told Rashi that it's Shem? The answer is the Medrash. What do you mean the Medrash? Yeah, Rashi feels if you have a kasha on the pasuk and you don't know where she went, we're allowed to use the traditions of the Medrash to say pshat. The Rashba means, where did she go? To a Navi. Which Navi? I don't know. The Torah doesn't say. So if the Torah doesn't say, pshat is she went to a Navi. Maybe she went to Shem. You're not allowed to say she went to Shem, says Rashbam. It's not muchach in the text, in the verse. If it's not muchach in the verse, that's not oimek hapshat. I'll give you another example. It says Yosef was lost, and who found him? An Ish. Says Rashi, who's the Ish? Gavriel. Why? It says in Daniel, v'ho Ish Gavriel. Rashbam says, very nice. You're going to start making a hekish? No. A man! You know who the man was? Well, it doesn't say, so you don't need to know. That's who he was. Pshat is a random guy found him. I agree with you, it was probably Gavriel al Pi Drush, but if you're writing Oimek HaPshat, and you need to know Oimek HaPshat, because when you learn, you need to know Pardes. You know why you need to know Pardes? There's some people, they say, I only, now, you have to be careful. Now we're gonna get to this. Why? So here's another, I'll give you one more example. It says by Moshe Rabbeinu in number 39, Vayikbar Oisai, and he buried him. So Rashi says either God or he buried himself. Says the Rashbam, you know who buried him? It doesn't say. So guess who buried him? We don't know. That's why. Who buried him? We don't know. But the Gemara says God. Good for the Gemara. But that's not Oimek Hapshat. Oimek Hapshat is the Torah doesn't tell us. Now they're both true. Oimek Hapshat, the Rashbam says, is we don't know. And Drusha is God buried him. Rashi says no. If the Gemara says God buried him, that becomes the Pshat. So we have this eternal machlokes. I don't think Rashi ever was moideh to the Rashbam that the Rashbam's parish is better than his. I'm certain Rashi was not moideh. The verdict of history is we embrace Rashi. We learn Rashi. The Rashbam was never niskabel as the authoritative. Of course, it's one of the Rishonim, one of the Perushei Emes, but Rashi never changed his mind. All Rashi was moideh to is that the way the Rashbam learns is still legitimate. Rashi wouldn't say the Rashbam is too reasonable and therefore wrong. It's legitimate, but it's not pshat. Let's end off b'divrei tzachos. The Chida writes in the Midbar Kedemus and in other places, Torah is a very full experience. Pardes, it's an orchard. Pshat, remez, drush, and side. Now, what if a guy says, it's drush, remez, side, I only use my skull. So then we say to him, pshat is oisios tipish. Somebody who only learns pshat, he is a fool, to put it lightly. And what if a guy says, I don't believe in side, I don't believe in secrets, that's not for us, No, you got to get a little flavor sometimes. It's good to get a little taste. If you don't get a taste of soid, then your pardes is pei reish daled. You remain a ferd. You remain a horse. So you need to have a full, a mule, noch besser, yeah? So you remain a pered. You remain a pered. Moira v'raboisai. Maybe we could say that the one practice of the Rashbam maybe sheds a lot of light about the approach of the Rashbam. What do we know about the Rashbam? He never lifted up his eyes. I'll give you an example. I like to learn a lot of Sfarim, but they're very big people. Try to talk to them about certain Sfarim. I never heard of it. You never heard of it? No. They know Gemara, Rashi, Tosfos, Chumash, Rashi. What about the 5,000 Sfarim that I like? I don't need it. Why? They're so great. They don't have to go this way. They could mine the Rashi and mine the Gemara. Not pshat, oimek hapshat. Oimek hapshat. The Rashbam's mahalach in the Torah world, in his approach to Torah, was how he acted in the physical world. He did not lift up his eyes. What does that mean he didn't lift up his eyes? It wasn't necessary for him to bring in outside sources, to bring in verification from the Gemara, from the Midrashim. He merely plummeted the depth of the material in front of him to be able to mine and extract the nuggets that lay in the text itself. That was the Mahalach of the Rashbam, how he learned, and that's how he walked around. He loy nasa einav, he did not lift up his eyes. But Rashi had a little bit of a different approach, to the extent where, let me share with you, Rabbeinu Tam, who, by the way, the Rosh says, was the greatest of all the Rishonim. B'chachma v'minyan. Rabbeinu Tam said, what Rashi wrote on Shas, I could mimic. I can never, we're good?
Yeah, but we're kind of pressed for time.
No, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Yeah. But the Rashba, what Rashi wrote on Chumash, I can never copy that. In fact, the Ramah Mipano brings down, the Chida brings down from the Ramah Mipano, that Rashi wrote his entire commentary al pisoid. That every word of Rashi alludes to Kabbalistic secrets. That before Rashi wrote his commentary, he fasted 613 Tanesim before he wrote his Perush. In fact, the Chida brings down that there was a great Makobel, Rav Nachman Bar Shmuel, who went to the kever of Rashi. He made all kinds of fasts and afflictions, and it was revealed to him that Rashi in this week's Parsha, look at number 44. Rashi, very mysteriously, it's almost unintelligible. Rashi says, Itai, Kamai Itai, Imai Kaloimar Elav. What in the world is Rashi talking about? It was revealed to this Makobel on Rashi's kever that this Rashi are soidos of deep mystical secrets. One last thing. La'achar me'av esrim shana, when Rashi passed away, he came to the Rashbam in a dream, the Chida brings down. And he said, Rashbam, I taught you everything. There's one thing I didn't teach you. There's a certain shame I didn't teach you. And Rashi taught the Rashbam the shame, and he said, now I've taught you everything. Says the Chida, look at the great Kedusha of Rashi. He didn't want to teach the Rashbam in his lifetime this shame because he thought maybe he didn't have permission. But then he went upstairs, he got permission from the Masifta de Rakia, and he was able to teach the Rashbam. This is a very important limud. Whether our approach to Chumash is more like Rashi than the Rashbam. But there is a concept, not only in Chumash, but in the Gemara and in everything we learn. People always want, another Maramakam, this way, that Rebbe. Hold your horses. Besides Pshat, there's even deeper than that. There's Oimek HaPshat. You could go deeper into the material. You learned the Pasuk. I already learned that Pasuk 1,000 times. Let me hear a new Pshat. No. Dig deeper into the Pshat. That's the Mahalach of the Rashbam, to which he said Rashi agreed to. And if Rashi said, if I would have lived even longer, I would have wrote another Perush and mining this great Mahalach and Torah of Oimek HaPshat. Rabbi, say have a great day. Shkaya.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.